Out of all of the platforming icons from the 90s and 2000s, Sonic remains as one of the few that still has presence in the public eye. And with the success of the cartoons and the movies, Sonic's brand seems to be very prominent right now. But although Sonic is getting attention through those mediums, what about the games? See, I remember watching SomeCallMeJohnny's review of Sonic Frontiers, and he said something that alarmed me about the Sonic franchise. He basically said that the success of the movies and cartoons are safeguards for the Sonic franchise, as without them, the franchise might have been long dead. And I have to agree with this notion because when you judge Sonic strictly off its games, their quality is inconsistent. So SEGA is very fortunate that Sonic has found success outside its games, because without it, Sonic's brand power would be greatly diminished. But this safeguard Sonic has is problematic. I say this because the movies will eventually end. And if the games continue being inconsistent while their safeguard is gone, then the Sonic franchise will face the consequences of their mediocrity. And thus SEGA will risk losing their mascot, or at the very least, lose the remaining brand power Sonic has. But to illustrate my point further, let me draw up some examples, starting with Mega Man. In the 2000s, Mega Man had an anime called Mega Man NT Warrior, based on the game series Mega Man Battle Network. Now, as a kid in the 2000s, this anime was my introduction to Mega Man, and I thought it was a definitive Mega Man. I didn't know about the classic games, X, or any of that. But when I go to EB Games and see all the different Mega Man games, it only added to my confusion. There was Mega Man X, Mega Man Legends, Mega Man Zero, Mega Man ZX, etc. All games featured Mega Man in some way, but were all different. So because I was uninformed and confused by the numerous Mega Man brands, I avoided the games. But when I got older and understood the franchise better, Capcom stopped making Mega Man games. But in contrast, Super Mario is a franchise whose brand, gameplay, and aesthetic have been consistent since its inception. And even though Mario has had its spin-offs, they all follow the same direction. And unlike Sonic, the Mario movie is just an extension of the games and doesn't serve as a franchise to safeguard. So, by looking at the examples of Mega Man and Mario, I fear Sonic's branding leans more towards Mega Man territory. From Colors to Lost World to Boom to Forces, Sonic's image has been all over the place. And if I was a kid now, it'd be difficult to become a fan of the games, given how often SEGA changes their direction. So with this video, the question I aim to answer is, how did SEGA mismanage Sonic's brand and become so inconsistent? Now, to understand Sonic's branding problem, we have to begin where SEGA went right, by analyzing Sonic's adventure era from 1998 to 2006. And the reason why I'm grouping all these games from this time period into one category is due to their similar directions in gameplay, story structure, and aesthetic. Now, the two games that set the precedence for this new era were Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2. They established a high momentum gameplay with action combat, focused on the story, and included significant character rosters. But in addition to these games, another game that I think holds importance for this era is Sonic Mega Collection. And the reason why this game was so important is because the games it contains were stuck on older SEGA hardware. So this game brought a lot of Sonic's games over to the GameCube to be more accessible. Also, the 2000s brought a new generation of potential fans who had no prior knowledge of the classic games, like myself. So Sonic Mega Collection created an opportunity for newcomers to be introduced to the classic Sonic games. And by experiencing these games, newcomers could gain a better appreciation for the franchise and see its evolution from classic Sonic to 3D Sonic. Therefore, Sonic Mega Collection laid the foundation for a new generation to gain an appreciation for Sonic's history, while the adventure games laid the foundation for Sonic's future. Now, one element that was prominent in this era was Sonic's aesthetic, and at this time, all the designs stemmed from the works of Kazuyuki Hoshino and Yuji Uekawa on Sonic Adventure 2. But what makes these designs so distinct is how they took classic Sonic's look and evolved it to fit a more mature Y2K shonen anime aesthetic. He got sharper quills, longer limbs, and his pupils changed from a plain black to a vibrant green. And if you look at the designs of popular anime protagonists during this time, like Pokemon, Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh, etc., Adventure era Sonic borrows a lot of their visual motifs. But Sonic's aesthetic wasn't the only thing it borrowed from anime, as the stories in Sonic games borrowed archetypes common in anime as well. From Sonic being a free-spirited protagonist, to his enemies turned rivals, to tsundere love interest, to mysterious characters from the future, to ancient gems containing immense mystical power, 2000 Sonic is heavily anime inspired. So from mainline titles, spin-offs, and TV shows, in the 2000s, this was consistently Sonic's brand image. High momentum gameplay with combat, focus on story, diverse roster of characters, and Y2K anime aesthetic. And even the way their stories were structured was the same, since they had numerous campaigns of different characters with different storylines. And eventually, once all campaigns were finished, they would all converge into one final chapter. Therefore, in the 2000s, Sonic's brand identity was consistent. From the mainline games to spin-offs like Sonic Advanced or Sonic Riders, they all inherited all the aforementioned elements. Even when you look at the anime Sonic X, the reason as to why it fit in so well with the other anime for kids at the time was because Sonic's brand identity was already in accordance with the aesthetics and archetypes of anime. So due to this consistency from the games, TV shows, and even comics, Sonic's brand identity and brand perception was easily digestible and inflexible. So with this strong brand cohesion, what would force SEGA to dismantle it? Now, Sonic 06 is the most important footnote in Sonic's history since its inception. For one, it served as a soft reboot for the franchise to usher in a new direction. And secondly, it doubled down on Sonic's edgy shonen anime aesthetic. See, from Sonic Adventure onward, every game felt like an evolution from what was previously established. The level designs got grander, the gameplay improved, and every new entry expanded the Sonic mythos. So, with Sonic 06's release being parallel to the dawn of the PS3 360 era, this game seemed like an opportunity for SEGA to take a giant leap forward for the franchise. And from a presentation standpoint, SEGA accomplished this. From the cinematic cutscenes, return of the hub world, and more realistic art direction, it really looked like SEGA wanted this game to be a bold statement for the franchise. Even if you look at other Japanese games released at this time like Tekken 6, Final Fantasy 13, Devil May Cry 4, Metal Gear Solid 4, etc., Sonic 06 bears similarities with their looks. From the UI, designs, hazy glow, and mid-Y2K aesthetic, it's obvious that 06 adopted these motifs to convey that it was going to have a more serious tone than previous Sonic games. But unfortunately, this new direction for Sonic wouldn't bode well for SEGA, because after the game was released, Sonic 06 became the laughingstock of the gaming industry. Now, what I'm about to say may sound controversial, but I don't think Sonic 06 is a bad game. I think it has some good ideas that were just executed poorly. And if SEGA were given more time to polish the game or given a second chance, Sonic 06 or the ideas in Sonic 06 would have made for an amazing experience. However, we don't have to imagine a world where Sonic 06 might have been fixed, because we have Project 06, a fan-made project created by Chaos X that fixes and improves upon the issues of Sonic 06, and people love it. So because of this fan project, it reinforces my belief that although Sonic 06 was poorly received, it had great potential but terrible execution. Unfortunately though, I think this lesson went over Sega's head, as instead of just reworking the aspects of the game that didn't work, Sega completely scrapped this game's direction and eventually distanced themselves from Sonic's brand identity established during the adventure era. And with this decision, it marked the start of Sonic's dark age and brand confusion. Sonic Unleashed to me is the perfect Sonic game. See, I previously stated that each game in the adventure era felt like an evolution of prior games, and that 06 seemed to mark a significant chapter in that line of evolution. But when I look at Sonic Unleashed, this game feels like the final evolution of Sonic games. The new boost system mixed with the 3D and 2D gameplay was genius, and moves like the homing attacks, light dash, and rail grinding felt better and were more precise. Also, the hub worlds returned and were redesigned to fit a more Pixar animated look, which in my opinion fits Sonic better than the previous realistic hub worlds. But despite all these great things, I still have an issue with Sonic Unleashed. See, previously I stated that Sonic 06 was supposed to be a soft reboot for the franchise, but when you look at Sonic Unleashed, although it was never marketed as such, it feels way more like a reboot than Sonic 06. And this is largely due to the absence of many characters, as the only returning characters are Sonic, Tails, Amy, and Eggman. Also, the story in Sonic Unleashed feels more tame than previous Sonic games like Sonic Adventure 2. And when I look at spin-offs like Sonic Battle, The Dark Brotherhood, and Riders, even their stories felt more grand than Unleashed. Now this feeling is primarily due to the cast in Sonic Unleashed being significantly smaller, but the fact that Unleashed story feels less significant to the mythos than the spin-offs leads me to believe that this narrative decision has a deeper meaning behind it. See, what I think happened between Sonic 06 and Unleashed is that Sega became risk-averse to the kinds of stories they were telling in Sonic games. And this is probably because of the backlash they received from Sonic 06's serious tone and weird inclusion of Elise. Which makes sense because 06 was supposed to be the next big thing for the franchise. And with the effort put into the game, Sega probably hoped that 06 would be received as such. But instead, all that hard work resulted in disaster and ridicule, which must have been a huge blow to Sega's ego. So I believe that Sega's decision to shrink Unleashed cast and subdue its story was to avoid any more humiliation. But like I stated before, I feel that Sega learned the wrong lesson from 06's failure. They failed to understand that 06 wasn't only poorly received because of its story, but largely because it was a broken game. Also, just because 06's story was poorly received doesn't mean Sega should stop including serious and cinematic stories in Sonic games. And this is unfortunate because Sonic's story is one of its biggest draws. This is why Sonic X was so popular. This is why Sonic has the longest comic book run of any video game character. And this is why Sonic has developed such a dedicated fan base. It's because of the stories and characters. And when Sega moved away from that, they lost a key factor that attracted many fans to Sonic, like myself. So by no means do I want to come off as trashing Sonic Unleashed. I think from a gameplay and presentation perspective, this game is the best of the franchise. But by Sega's decision to move away from storytelling, the Sonic brand loses something that made it so special. After Unleashed released Sonic Colors, a continuation of the Boost gameplay, and is considered as another great Sonic game. But this is also where narratively, we see Sonic take a profound shift in tone. See, throughout this whole video, I've said that Sonic in the 2000s borrows heavily from anime, and although Sonic Unleashed still maintains some semblance of that, in Colors, those semblances are gone. And instead of feeling like an anime, Colors' tone is more adjacent to Western Saturday morning cartoons. Now from a gameplay standpoint, Sonic Colors deserves all its praise, but I hated this change in tone. From the cringy jokes to bare bones storyline, Sonic Colors felt so far from the Sonic that I grew up playing. And unfortunately, this trend continued with Sonic Generations. Now I love Sonic Generations as a game, but as a game meant to celebrate Sonic's 20th anniversary, I think it did little to commemorate Sonic's history. For one, one, its presentation feels rather cheap. The hub world is just a blank space on a 2D plane, and there's little to no story. Even the cutscenes are low effort for Sonic standards. I mean, the cinematics we're used to from games like 06, Riders, and Unleashed are absent. Also, many fan-favorite characters return, but their appearances are meaningless as they only serve a few lines and sideline cheer Sonic as he fights the final boss. The only saving grace for Generations is its gameplay and level designs. But beyond that, Generations does little to commemorate Sonic. But even though I wasn't satisfied with these games from a story perspective, I was still optimistic for the franchise's future. Because from a gameplay standpoint, SEGA built a great foundation. All they had to do from now on was just use what they built and improve on a winning formula. Something so simple and impossible to mess up, right? Sonic Lost World is the biggest disgrace to the franchise. Even with some of the bad Sonic games, I can find redeeming qualities, but I can't for Sonic Lost World. I mean, what was SEGA thinking? They completely scrapped the successful boost system for this Mario Galaxy-esque gameplay. And what's even more insulting is that Sonic was supposed to be different from Mario. So I'm confused as to why SEGA would blatantly copy him. Also, the new additions, the Deadly Six, are the worst additions to the Sonic franchise. I mean, Team Dark, Cream and Cheese, Blaze, Silver, Emerald, and Chip are all in many ways better additions. But overall, I think what's really disappointing about Lost World is how unnecessary it was. SEGA didn't have to reinvent the wheel. They already had a winning formula with their prior games. But for some stupid reason, they thought diverging from what fans like was a good idea. And following this fumble, SEGA would fumble again with Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. Another unnecessary experimental departure that resulted in failure. But SEGA's woes wouldn't end there, as their next game, Sonic Forces, a game meant to celebrate Sonic's 25th anniversary, would be another disappointment. This, by all definitions, is the most confusing era for Sonic. For no reason at all, SEGA/Sonic team jumped from idea to idea only to find failure. And what's worse is that they didn't have to. All they had to do was stick to what fans liked, which was the boost system. But even when they strike gold, Sonic team can't stop themselves from self-sabotaging. So with Forces as a third consecutive fail, the Sonic brand was probably at its bleakest point. And as a fan, I took Sonic Forces as the last straw and believed that SEGA should give Sonic to another developer besides Sonic Team, since they have proven to be incompetent at handling the IP and have no idea or clear plan for the franchise. Now, to be honest, I haven't played Sonic Frontiers, but from what I've seen online, it looks good. But even though this game may be good, I still have issues with its direction. For one, despite more effort being put in the story, it still feels safe. Don't get me wrong, the lore about the ancients, Sage, callbacks, and characterizations were all well done. But compared to the Sonic stories from the 2000s, Frontiers still feels rather tame. It feels like instead of fully committing to making a deeper story, SEGA would rather just dabble slightly beneath the surface, because if they delve any deeper, they risk being in Sonic 06 territory. However, this risk aversion is limiting the storytelling potential. It's true that the Sonic series has had bad stories, but it also had great ones like Sonic Adventure 2, Black Knight, and Riders. So even though Sonic Frontiers is headed in the right direction in terms of a story, I feel like SEGA are scared to fully dive in and take more risks with their stories to avoid scrutiny. Also, another problem I have with Frontiers' direction is in how it steals from other games. Most notably, from Breath of the Wild, Shadow of the Colossus, and Nier Automata. Now, when Sonic borrowed from anime in the 2000s, that was more subtle because the aesthetics and archetypes it took were common, and Sonic always added his own twist to it. But with Frontiers, the copying is just more blatant and barely reworked. I mean, the melancholic tone, giant robots, AI, nature covering the remnants of an ancient civilization, Sage looking just like 2B. The similarities are too overt. All in all, I'm glad people like this game, and I appreciate the effort Sonic Team put in. But Sonic Frontiers is just another indication that Sonic Team have no vision of their own for Sonic. And instead of subtly borrowing things and making something unique, they rather just rip off trends and apply them to Sonic without any unique spin. Lastly, I gotta call a spade a spade. Sonic Team is just not that talented. Every time they gain momentum, they always mess it up. And frankly, as a Sonic fan, this inconsistency is exhausting. And it's so frustrating because when you look at other franchises that have been going as long as Sonic, sure they've had ups and downs, but none of them have suffered to the lows and inconsistencies that Sonic has. I mean, Sonic is Sega's mascot, but the way they treat him is second rate. And it's just sad because the most exciting news from Sonic for the past few years has been from people outside of Sega. The movies, cartoons, and fan projects like Project 06 and Sonic Unleashed Recompiled are all Sonic related things that fans love, but Sega/Sonic Team had little to do with. And if Sega has to keep on relying on outsiders to keep this franchise alive, that's not sustainable. But what's even more frustrating is that Sega does have the talent to make good Sonic games, they just don't allocate that talent to Sonic. Sega is home to many prominent studios who make games like Shin Megami Tensei, Persona, 13 Sentinels, Unicorn Overlord, and Yakuza. So, with this talent creating the success of other properties, it's confusing as to why Sonic, the company's mascot, doesn't get any similar treatment. I'm just saying, with the inconsistency of the Sonic games, Sega should count themselves lucky that Paramount, Netflix, and the dedicated fans are keeping the franchise alive. But this luck is not eternal and will eventually run out. And when it does, I'm not confident that Sonic Team has the resources to realize the great potential the Sonic IP has.